Bound by secrets, torn by fate, a tale of forbidden love, reincarnated regrets, and the silent wars between sisters, wives, and the men who betrayed them. I came back after 21 years. The train arrived in the afternoon. It wasn't crowded. The station hadn't changed. One platform, a bench that sloped slightly, and a vending machine that still hummed despite the paper taped across its coin slot. The air smelled faintly of damp concrete and dried leaves. It could have been any season, really. But it was early spring, the kind where the cold still clings in the shadows. The walk to the house was the same path I took every day until I left. The buildings hadn't moved. The convenience store still stood at the corner, shutters drawn halfway down even in the middle of the day. The laundry shop had a new sign, but the sidewalk out front was still cracked from the roots of the same tree. I passed the school, the one with the stone wall I once leaned against. A student's scarf hung on a branch nearby, forgotten or maybe lost the day before. The house sat at the end of the road. It wasn't different. Not really. The paint had peeled more and the fence leaned further outward, but the bones were the same. The plum tree in the corner of the yard was still standing, though its branches looked thinner, more brittle. No blossoms yet. Maybe this year it won't bloom at all. I stood at the gate for a while. The latch stuck, as it always had, before it gave in with a metallic cough. The walkway to the door was lined with uneven stones, some half sunk into the earth, others cracked clean through. Moss had begun to creep along the edges. The front steps had darkened with time. The key was in the mailbox, a plain envelope sealed with tape, no note. It was the same key from before, same dull brass, same worn ridges. It turned in the lock with a sound I hadn't heard in 2 decades. I paused before pushing the door open. Inside, the air was dry. Still, not stale. Someone had opened a window, perhaps the caretaker, but untouched. The curtains were drawn, so light filtered in softly, shadows pooled in corners, unmoving. I stepped in. My shoes left faint prints on the wood floor. I took them off and lined them up next to the door. His slippers were there too, as if still waiting to be used. 1 pair brown, 1 gray. They looked worn but clean. The living room held its shape. The armchair still faced the window. A thin cushion was placed neatly against the back. The low table had a newspaper folded in half, the date almost faded. A water glass sat beside it, dried rings along the rim. On the wall, the calendar still hung, flipped to the wrong month. I sat on the edge of the couch. The fabric was rougher than I remembered, and the color was faded. My hand brushed against the side of the cushion. There was a tear along the seam, hand-stitched like he'd fixed it himself. There was nothing in the air to signal that anything had ended, only a quiet that settled into the bones of the house. I opened the window a few inches. The frame resisted at first, then gave in with a push. The air outside smelled of distant rain. I sat there for a while, not thinking, just adjusting to the weight of a space that still remembered me, even though I had spent years forgetting it. He died 2 weeks ago. I wasn't here when it happened. I didn't come to the hospital. I didn't call. The message came from a distant cousin, brief, factual. The funeral was quiet, he said. Not many people, just a few neighbors. I wasn't expecting it. I waited until everything was over before coming. I didn't want questions. I didn't want to face people who remembered the boy who left and never came back. I told myself it would be easier to arrive after the noise had passed. After the formalities were done. That evening, I walked through the house. The kitchen smelled faintly of soy and dust. The stovetop was clean. A single bowl sat in the drying rack, turned upside down. The kettle on the counter was old but well kept. Inside the refrigerator were a few items: pickled radish, a half-finished bottle of sauce, and a block of tofu still within date. I threw some of it out. In the hallway, the cabinet was filled with towels folded tightly into rows. Nothing out of place. In his bedroom, the bed was made. 2 pillows, both flattened. The closet doors creaked slightly when I opened them. His clothes were organized by type. Sweaters to the left, pants to the right, and shirts stacked on the shelf above. Neutral colors, no patterns. The way he always dressed. The drawer beside the bed held a wristwatch, a comb, and a pen. No letters, no photographs. The desk drawer in the living room was filled with notebooks. Plain black covers, worn corners. Inside, his handwriting had barely changed. Even lines, clean strokes. Most of it was routine: weather notes, medication schedules, market lists. Occasionally, a line stood out. Rained today, water pooled by the steps. He didn't speak much again. He left before breakfast. I didn't know if he meant me in those notes, but I assumed he did. He never wrote in full sentences. He never said more than he needed. The same way he used to speak. In the closet above the washing machine, I found a box filled with older things. Receipts bundled in rubber bands. Yellowing photographs. A keychain from a company he once worked for. A school brochure with my name still visible across the bottom. I placed the box back and didn't open it again. That night, I slept in the guest room. The room was small, a twin bed, one window, and a desk that hadn't been touched in years. The curtain was drawn, but a faint light from the street slipped through the edge. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling. There was a crack along the plaster, shaped like a shallow river. I thought about calling someone, then decided not to. In the morning, I made rice and ate it alone. I sat where he used to sit, facing the wall, my back to the window. The table had a small chip at the edge. I ran my finger over it while eating. After cleaning up, I swept the floor, took out the trash. I refilled the kettle, though I didn't boil it. Small actions. They filled time. Later that day, I walked to the river. The path was quiet. Houses faded behind fences. A dog barked once, then fell silent. The trees lining the river were still bare, but the grass beneath them had started to turn green. I found the bench near the bend, the same one I had seen him walk toward as a boy. I never followed them. Now I sat on it. The water moved slowly. Not still, but unhurried. There were small ripples near the edge. I stayed there for a long time, not checking my watch. The bench creaked when I shifted my weight, then fell silent again. When I returned to the house, the sky was darker. The window I had opened earlier was still cracked. I closed it before night fully settled in. In his room, I opened the top drawer again. Beneath the folded socks was a small envelope. My name was written on it in pencil. Inside was a folded piece of paper, blank. I stared at it for a while. Then I put it back in the envelope and slipped it into my coat pocket. The house never felt warm, even in spring. The sun reached the windows, but the air inside remained still, the light fading into corners like it didn't want to stay. I remained for a few more days. It was easy to stay. Time didn't press me there. There were no clocks to obey, no alarms. Just the sound of wind brushing against the roof, birds announcing each hour without precision. I stopped unpacking. I moved through the house slowly, touching things only to place them back where they belonged. I swept the floor twice, even though I didn't need to. Replaced towels that hadn't been used. Filled the kettle, then left it cold. The notebook I had taken from the drawer remained on the table, closed. I hadn't opened it since the train ride. It felt like it would say what I already knew. On the third morning, I stood in front of the mirror in the small bathroom. The mirror had warped slightly around the edges from years of steam. My reflection stared back quietly, unchanged. Older, more tired, but not different. It occurred to me that I didn't know what I had hoped to find here. Closure, maybe, or a shape to the silence that had sat between us for so long. But the house didn't offer any of that. It didn't give or take. It only waited. The envelope was still in my coat pocket. The blank paper inside had creased at the corners. I unfolded it again and stared at it under the kitchen light. Still empty, still clean. It didn't feel like a message, not even like an apology left unfinished. It felt like the final word in a long, unsent conversation, one that never found the courage to begin. That afternoon, I returned to the river. The path was soft from the previous day's rain. I took careful steps. The bench near the bend was wet. I sat anyway. The air was heavier than before. The clouds overhead were still and low. A smell like cold metal hung over the water. I watched the river move without direction. It didn't rush. It didn't pause. It just moved. Not toward anything. Just away from here. I wondered if he had felt that too when he came here each week. That quiet, indifferent current that kept going whether you watched it or not. I didn't stay long. I felt tired in a way that wasn't physical. Back at the house, the plum tree had lost another branch. It must have happened overnight. The broken piece lay beside the base, bark stripped at the edge, clean like a snapped bone. I left it there. Nature breaks what it no longer has the strength to hold. That evening, I made rice but didn't eat it. I left the light on in the living room and sat in the dark. The notebook sat in front of me. I reached for it, opened to the first page. My name was written at the top, in his writing. That was all. The rest of the page was empty. I turned it slowly, page by page. Entries began halfway through. Rain again. He's not home. Doctor called. Didn't answer. I tried to talk to him today. He walked away. I read each line, one at a time. They weren't emotional, just observations. But I could feel what wasn't written, that he had wanted to be understood, that he hadn't known how. He looked tired. He hasn't called. Maybe next year. I think he's angry. I don't know why. One entry stood alone at the bottom of a page. There is still time. There was no date. I didn't know when he wrote it. It could have been years ago. It could have been a month before he died. I closed the notebook. There wasn't still time. Not anymore. That night, I lay in the guest room and listened to the wind. It made the house creak. The floor, the walls, the windows. Everything was whispered in different tones. I didn't sleep. At some point, I stood and walked to his room. The bed was untouched. The closet is still slightly open. I sat on the edge of the mattress and placed the envelope on the pillow. In the dark, it didn't look like anything important, just another object in a room filled with quiet. But I left it there, and I didn't take it back. The next day I packed, not carefully, just enough to leave. I folded the towel I had used. I washed the bowl I hadn't eaten from, brushed the dirt off my shoes at the door. I locked the house behind me. I didn't look back. At the station, the train was delayed. I sat on the bench and watched the digital clock on the wall change by the minute. The people around me didn't speak. Most stared at their phones, half asleep, waiting for movement. When the train arrived, I boarded without thinking. The ride back to the city passed quietly. I didn't open the notebook again. I placed it in the bottom of my bag and stared out the window. Fields blurred into buildings, trees into metal, the sky turned gray. I returned to my apartment. Everything was as I left it. Shoes by the door, plants near the window, stale air that clung to curtains. I sat on the floor of the living room and leaned against the wall. Outside, a neighbor's television played quietly through the wall. A variety show, laughter, then silence again. I stayed like that until night. I didn't unpack. A week passed, then another. I went back to work, caught up on emails, answered texts. I didn't tell anyone where I had been. One night, I pulled out the notebook and read the final page again. The last line was faint. He didn't come. I closed the cover and placed it on a shelf. I didn't touch it again. 2 months later, I received a letter from the hospital. They had found something in the blood work from a routine checkup. They wanted to run more tests. I didn't schedule them. The weeks passed. My body grew weaker, but slowly in ways easy to ignore at first. Fatigue, headaches, then dizziness, then nausea, then weight loss. Eventually, I stopped pretending I didn't know. I didn't tell anyone. I went back to the house one last time, not to stay, just to be there. I arrived before sunrise. The street was still. The sky is beginning to shift. I walked through the yard. The tree was fully bare now. No leaves, no blossoms. The branch I had left had sunk into the ground. I unlocked the door. Inside, the air was the same. Nothing had moved. I sat in the chair he used to sit in. I watched the light slowly fill the room. I didn't stay long. When I left, I placed the key back in the mailbox. I closed the gate behind me. I walked away. In the end, nothing was resolved. The silence never broke. The letter was never written. The apology was never spoken. But something remained. Not peace, not clarity, just stillness, like the sound of wind in a house that no longer expects anyone to return.